Welcome back to Alva's Garage. So in this video, we'll hopefully get the car started. I'll review a few issues I ran into and a little off-topic fiasco I had while working on this project. But stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have it fired up by the end of the video. So making some progress on the car and ran into one unforeseen issue. I knew that the LA pulley in the bottom you have to drill out to match the Magnum bolt pattern, which I did. But what I didn't know about was the pre-1970, so I think 69 and below, the water pump was a shorter snout, so it actually sat in more. So I'm not sure how well you can tell in the video, but the water pump pulley's here, and the crank pulley. So there's a 3/4 of an inch difference between where the crank pulley is and the water pump pulley. I went ahead and ordered a pulley set, which should resolve this. But another issue I ran into is the alternator pulley is also not quite aligned. So I'm running an aftermarket 165 amp alternator, which is a little bit wider than the factory Mopar one, which results in the alternator hitting the head and the pulley not being aligned with the crank. So once I get the other pulley set come in, I'll have to identify whether, hopefully, I'm hoping that the crank pulley sits out a little bit further and aligns to the water pump, and I can, have the alternator pushed outwards to align. Otherwise, what I'm gonna have to do is run a double crank and double alternator pulley, and use the outer groove for the alternator. And that's what it's one of the issues I ran into when from a 1967 273 small block LA engine to the Magnum block, and with the water pump sticking out about 3/4 of an inch further, this ends up hitting into the E-fan I had set up. So I have a radiator fan and shroud set up, and so what I think I'm going to do is remove the shroud and fan and configure the fan to be in front as a pusher fan versus a puller. That should give me enough clearance on the engine side. I just hope I have enough clearance on the fan side to clear the little brace here. Alright, so the pulleys came in, and it looks like it's going to resolve my issue. So just kind of compare. This is the factory 273 crank pulley, and in the background would be the size for the 360. See, it's about 3/4 of an inch taller. Similar with the water pump. This should resolve my alignment issue with the crank and water pump pulley, as well. Since this has an additional spacing, we'll resolve the issue I have with the alternator. So one step closer to getting it fired up. Went ahead, got the pulleys installed, and overall everything lined up pretty well. So the two aftermarket crank and water pump pulleys lined up perfectly. For the alternator, I did use some washers as a spacer to kind of space it out from the head a little bit further than what it used to be. But overall, good clearance. Came out pretty well. So I had to make a new return line for the fuel system, and one thing I'd like to do is test it. So I have it rigged up to my air compressor, and essentially just put it in a bucket of water. This is the return. Oh yeah, see, you can tell I've already only coming for the fitting, so I just got to torque it down. But essentially my goal is to test to make sure the hose itself isn't leaking. So I'm going to go ahead and re-tighten that fitting and give it another test. So I had to re-torque down everything, and you can see there's no air leaking. So I'm going to go ahead and just crank up the air pressure. This is a return line, so it's probably not going to see more than 5 or 10 pounds. But I just test it as high as it goes, which is about 140 pounds. And no air. So now I have pretty good confidence that this hose, even though it's on a low pressure side. This is something I always recommend doing, especially if you're making your own lines, is go ahead and pre-test it with some air and ensure there's no leaks. The last thing you want is have fuel leaking on the engine or manifold, or oil spilling over the ground and losing oil pressure and ruining the engine. So I think it's always good practice to do. So keep it up with the sheep's clothing bit. The Commando air cleaner cover was essentially a must from my perspective to keep that 273 look. So I had to get a little creative with the fuel line and air filter element. So I'm running a mini 2-inch air filter, and then the fuel lines I had to run essentially to 90 degrees, since the fuel lines are now buried in the air cleaner assembly. So essentially 90 and then go down. Same thing with the air filter or the fuel filter here. But overall, with the setup with the 2-inch filter and the cover, I measure roughly about ½ inch of clearance, the top of the air cleaner assembly and the hood. So I got the radiator coolant hoses and transmission cooler lines plumbed up. So overall, coming out pretty good. I went ahead and riveted an overflow tank to the radiator. So I hope I never have to take it off, because it's going to be a pain. But overall, came out pretty good. So last steps now are just wiring and exhaust. Because of the new dug headers, I had to go ahead and redo the high flow cat setup, since some of the manifolds were shorter and another one was longer. So kind of got this tacked up and ready to go. But yeah, I'm running two 200 cell high flow cats on the car to cut down on emissions and make the car more enjoyable. That way you don't smell and stink like exhaust every time you drive it. So all right, one step closer. All right, went ahead and got everything welded up. Came out pretty good. Yep, that's ATF on the ground. Used some RTV to seal the oil pan on the transmission, and it looks like either didn't use enough or maybe I torqued it down too soon. But yeah, it's leaking. So one more thing to add to the list: replace the RTV with the actual gasket. Looks like it wasn't the fault of the RTV. The pan was a little warped, so I just straightened it out with a hammer and added a gasket. All right, time to build some oil pressure. So cranking without spark plugs. Helps if the battery's connected. Probably also helps if the neutral switch is connected on transmission, which I do not believe it is. So we'll be right back. All right, neutral safety switch connected. Hopefully that was it. Otherwise there'll be a troubleshooting section. Oh, let me connect the battery again. All right, got some pretty decent oil pressure. It looks like I'm almost out of gas. So I'm gonna do a compression test, and I'll do a follow-up after break-in. So this is compression pre-break-in. Trying to see if I can get it a good spot where I can see it on camera. So one issue I ran into is the spark plug cable 90-degree boot will not work with the Magnum head, at least with my setup. With these headers, it's recessed too far in, so there's no way I can get to them in there. So luckily my hoarding pays off, and I had some old 45 degrees that'll work for now. But I went ahead and ordered some Magna Core 8.5 millimeters in black with the straight boots. I only have 2 or 3 of these left over from my RX-7. So new set of cables coming in a few days. But I think for fire up and at least initial break-in, I'll have some spark plug cables to use. All right, went ahead and checked cranking timing. Everything seems to be good. I'll have my wife do the honors of our first fire up. My intent is to hopefully fire it up maybe for a good 20-30 seconds and then shut it down and check for leaks. I already checked the fuel system. There doesn't seem to be any leaks, but I just want to let it run for a little bit, shut it down, and check for leaks, especially around the transmission once that the transmission lines get pressurized. So, all right, honeys, give it a go. So hold on, put it on key. Is it on?
Yeah.
I
mean, no, it's not.
So put on first. I'll try the fuel system a bit. Oh wait, turn it off. Hey. Gotta connect the battery first. Is it off? It's all the way off?
Yeah.
Okay. So put it in the on position. Alright. Now. Alright, turn on. Give it a little gas. Hold on. A little bit. Just a little bit. Hold on. Alright, round 2. Don't give it gas this time. Just on. Alright. A little more air. Alright, try again. Good. Do a little gas. Turn off. Alright, so successful. Looks like the header paint. I hope it's header paint burnt off. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Header paint and header wrap. So doesn't seem to be leaking any oil from the oil filter. I'll crawl underneath the car right now, check the transmission. But pretty good, successful first fire up. Hopefully tidy up a few things and then go for a drive. Now that I got the timing and auto adjustment dialed in, it fires right up. So let's give it a go. Just got to give it a wash, clean it up, tidy up a few things, and go for a drive. All right, off on our maiden voyage. I think low on gas. We'll go grab some gas and maybe just cruise around up a hill or two. Alright, I did a 20-mile shakedown run. No major issues. A few exhaust rattles, and it sounds like an exhaust leak somewhere around the X pipe. But other than that, car ran well, performed well. I opened it up a little bit, kept the RPMs below. I think the highest I saw was 4,200. So still taking it easy. I'm going to do 500-mile break-in, but I did want to go out and do a little shakedown run. And yep, looks like I got a few exhaust issues to resolve. But other than that, I don't see any leaks. It looks like I may have overfilled the transmission a bit, so I might have to siphon some out. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with the performance. So I have 255 45 R18s on some Firestone Firehawk Indy 500, and in first gear, mashing on it, it does break traction, but it's very controllable. So it breaks traction, but it catches it pretty quick. But it did kind of ease off, but overall seems manageable. Thanks for watching. Then a little off topic, while working on the exhaust, I heard some engine revving. I thought maybe it was my neighbor firing up his old Chevy, but then the engine kept revving and revving. There's just something funny going on, so I decided to go check out what all the fuss was about, and sure enough, there was somebody stuck in my driveway. It looks like they drove up into the driveway and then they backed out straight. And yeah, that's the result. So crushed our mailbox. Fortunately, I was able to salvage it. We just had to replace the post and was able to give it a fresh coat of paint. Mailbox is back up and running. But yep, this is my fiasco I had to deal with on Saturday.
Oh my God. Turn your wheel to the left. There, that's good. Stop. You're not looking at me. All right.
I had a big job like you. I'm so sorry.
Look out for the
Mailbox.
Stop right there.
Stop.